tonight's speaker, Elizabeth Bruch. You won't be disappointed. Elizabeth is an associate professor in sociology and complex systems at the University of Michigan and an external faculty member at Santa Fe Institute. She directed Michigan's Computational Social Science Initiative from 2018 to 2021 and is currently the associate director of Michigan's Institute for Data Science and AI. She uses tools from network and computer science, statistics, biology, quantitative marketing to study how people stumble their way through major life decisions. You may have seen some of the work that she did with Mark Newman on online dating, which was fantastic. Her work has appeared in Science, PNAS, Science Advances, American Journal of Sociology. She recently launched Rebel, a nonprofit dating app and research study aimed at college students. Oh, interesting. And is finishing a book about U.S. dating markets. So thank you very much for making time for us. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've had the good fortune of being at kind of amazing places, and people come and they're like, I'm so excited to be here. And now I feel like I'm so excited to be here. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to share this project with you. It's kind of a weird project. It's the first time I've done research where I'm bringing it to audiences and being like, is this a good idea? So your feedback is really welcome. What I want to do is I want to just tell you a little bit about me as a scholar and then kind of use that as a bridge to talk about the project I'm bringing to you today. So I'm a sociologist, but I've been really fortunate to have a lot of amazing collaborators in other fields. And so over the past 10 years, I've been exploring in particular how network science methods can be used to answer really foundational questions in social science. And this work I do in close collaboration with people whose names will probably be very familiar to many of you. And what is very exciting about it to me is that work has been going on for a while. Initially, it started off using very off-the-shelf methods. And more recently, we've been developing new network science methods to answer very specifically social science problems. So just a little overview of some of those early projects. I don't know why my other collaborators not showing up. So Dan Larimore and Hunter Watman, a graduate student at CS Boulder, and I have worked on a project basically developing techniques to reveal the competition going on in online dating markets, not only who's most competitive, like who basically beats out the competition, but who competes with whom. And what we show is that the things you learn from studying competitiveness are actually very different from what you would study with network measures like PageRank or popularity, like who gets the most attention, is very different from who is able to get attention from the people who get the most attention. So that's one of my earlier projects. Ooh, weird. Yes. And so Tina was kind enough to mention this project that I've done with Mark Newman. We did two studies looking at the structure of dating markets, looking at how they're organized into submarkets and also how they're organized into leagues, basically showing that people tend to pursue partners who are around 25% more desirable than they are. And a lot of the complaining about low response rates, well, it's not everything, but like part of the problem is people are essentially pursuing people who are out of their league. There you go. But more recently, like I said, some of the most exciting work I feel like is going on right now, where we have new measures that reveal sort of theoretically important features of social structure. Sociologists care so much about social structure, but we actually don't have good metrics for it. Like we have great metrics for studying income inequality and sort of resource inequality in terms of fungible resources like money, but actually we don't have much at all about sort of the architecture of social systems and sort of resources like status or power. And so most recently with Mark and amazing now postdoc at the Santa Fe Institute, if you ever go there, please seek him out. His name is Max Jody. We've been looking at basically using data on deference and dominance type behaviors to develop what we call like a behavioral equivalent of money, like basically a metric indicating how much more powerful or respected one person is than another. And these same methods can be generalized to not assume a given distribution of statuses, but to review the shape of social hierarchies. And so, for example, to what extent do one of the projects we work on a lot is I love high school social hierarchies. We all have seen those movies. And so like, what are all high school social hierarchies the same? Do they all have the same shape? Are they basically like feudal systems with a king at the top and the serfs at the bottom? Are they hourglasses? Are they diamonds? Like, what do they actually look like? And the project actually shows that there are high schools, even within the same country, vary an enormous amount in terms of the depth of their hierarchies, but most of them are pyramids. Not always, but most of the time they're pyramids. With most people at the bottom at the top. So now we have the king and the feudal peasants kind of structure for the vast majority of high schools. However, a second project of ours asked, well, that's not the only feature of status architecture we might care about. For example, in sociology, one thing we care very deeply about is structures like caste systems. Okay, so to what extent is it that your communities are effectively positions within a social hierarchy versus the opposite would be what you can think of as like parallel hierarchies, where each community has the full distribution of statuses within it. So we developed a model that combines community detection and ranking to be able to distinguish between we have a metric for defining how caste-like is this hierarchy. And so we find, for example, that there are, even within the United States, there's huge variation. There are high schools that are very tightly wound caste systems. And then there are other high schools that have these parallel hierarchies. And when you look at what kinds of high schools tend to fall into what kinds of categories, what you find is that it's small, basically ethnically and like financially homogeneous high schools that tend to have these caste systems, and it's large public high schools that have these parallel hierarchies. And there's this wonderful anthropology book by an anthropologist who went in and studied high schools, and if you ask why is this, he has a wonderful insight into it. Like, imagine a small private high school or whatever, like the nerd rides the bus with the cheerleader. Like they see their status, everyone's kind of bumping up against each other. It's very visible, and there are very direct opportunities to have dominance interactions. At a big high school, you don't know most people. Like you can have much more sort of like parallel worlds existing, and more importantly, the people at the top can't control the whole system, right? Like they can at a small high school. So this is a really fun, interesting project, and it's very exciting to me as a way of combining community detection and rankings. So I initially thought I would talk to you about some of these projects, but I realized that like I'm having a problem. So a lot of these projects are in the service of a bigger project, and that project is giving me a lot of anxiety. And I really realized what I'd really like to do is get your feedback on that larger project. So I'm going to slip into that right now. And to kind of motivate it, I want to talk to you a little bit about social rules. Okay, there's many types of social rules and words for rules in social science. We have laws, we have norms, regulations, customs, protocols, scripts or expectations, requirements, precedents, guidelines, tradition. And even within these different categories, rules take many different forms. This is not a talk explicitly only about rules. I'm not going to go into it, but there's a lot of wonderful variation in types of rules that occur. But what's interesting is that all of them serve the same purpose. They all regularize behavior in social life to make it less uncertain and more predictable. Okay, and so regardless of their origin or the situation. And of course, rules don't exist in isolation. There's rule systems, collections of rules that really tell us what actions are possible given a situation and what consequences will follow from those actions. Okay, so this is often what sociologists talk about social structure. They're really also talking about these rule systems to some extent, and they impose limits on what kinds of roles, meanings, or activities can occur in different parts of social life. And the thing I want to emphasize for the purpose of this talk is actually that the rule systems are really systems of contingencies. When I say they define what's available in a given situation or what follows from a decision, that's really talking about contingency. And so just to briefly illustrate that, for example, if you go to college, you have to decide what to major in. And if you, if you don't, you're going to enter your first job and find some kind of, and pursue a particular occupation or job. After graduation, let's say you majored in sociology, you'll have particular options available to you: social worker, data scientist, human relations. Kinesiology provides an overlapping but also distinct set of opportunities. And of course, if you didn't go to college, you have other opportunities as you move through your job. So over time, of course, as you move through the system, opportunities open and close depending on your prior decisions. Now, this is a very kind of silly diagram in the sense that there's much more complexity to this. People go back, they drop out, whatever. There's many things going on. But the general sense in which this is a contingent process is very real. Okay, so why am I telling you this? Because I want to kind of highlight this contingency as a way of comparing. These are the complexities that come. You can have multiple majors can lead to the same jobs. There's upward and downward mobility, and so on and so forth. And there's options that aren't going to high school or entering your first job. But why am I telling you this? Because I want to draw a parallel between the contingencies that drive life and the contingencies that drive games. Okay, so games like tic-tac-toe or Monopoly are also contingent systems where the outcomes are not fixed. The unfolding sequence of people's moves carve out different paths through a game space, right? And of course, this is some of the mappings of the contingencies of tic-tac-toe, where each move, of course, closes off what other moves are available and kind of moves you through this game space. And this figure is intentionally there to kind of mirror what you saw earlier with college and careers, insofar as each player's moves take you down this particular path. So both games and social life are systems of contingency, but there's actually a really important difference in the nature of it, which is that in the case of games, contingency is contrived, right? It's designed to be a compelling balance of luck and skill and certainty and uncertainty. And there's a wonderful paper, if you're into this kind of thing, by Thomas Malaby called Beyond Play, where he draws for these parallels between games and life. And talks about and sort of makes this point that they're there to calibrate to produce a mix of predictable and unpredictable outcomes. But also he goes on to say that games are compelling precisely because of their ability to mimic and constitute this texture of life, but in a more bounded and graspable and masterable form. Okay, so what makes games compelling is that they give you that texture of experience, but in a way that's that you can master. So why am I telling you this? Because I want to talking about why games are compelling helps highlight all the ways that life is not compelling. So like life is a game that sucks. Okay. Why? Because there's no map, there's no game board, there's no rule book, there's no like manual you can pick up that tells you all the strategies. And there's no do-overs. You can play tic-tac-toe over and over in chess, you get better at it, right? But you can only have one first job. You can never rerun your 20s, right? And so this feature of games, our contingencies are really overwhelming and stressful and unpleasant. And I just want to briefly talk a little bit more about these features. I'm sure you can intuit them, but I think it's nice to make them a little more concrete. So there's no map. There's no like, I'm traveling through the forest of utter and complete failure, but maybe I'll end up in the range of possibilities if I just follow this path, right? We don't have a map. We don't have any kind of sense of where our choices are taking us and what's nearby. And similarly, in terms of expertise, a coach, the whole point of a coach is to see the whole playing field, right? And to kind of map out for people what they're supposed to do together. But a life coach, not so much, right? And of course, like life coach, that's a little unfair insofar as life coaches are particularly incompetent. There's a wonderful social science paper in the American Journal of Sociology that basically traces the career paths of life coaches and says like sort of the modal path to being a life coach is not succeeding in the job market. And so maybe this is a little unfair, but then, okay, so like fine, not life coaches, but then you take out like, what are other people who give you advice about your life? Your family, your peers, even people who are formal advisors, career counselors, and college counselors and things like that. The key thing is that they don't actually see the whole picture either, right? They don't get this view. And so it's striking. I've become really consumed with this idea. I was like, wow, this is really terrible. And just to briefly touch on the problem of do-overs, like in games, you can start over and over and over, and you can learn from your mistakes. And there are things in life that you can do many times, like ordering at McDonald's. You didn't like the chicken selects. Well, you'll get the quarter pounder next time. No harm, no foul. Going on vacation, you hated that vacation, but you learned something about what you like. You like beach vacations, not hiking vacations. You can do better next time. But the most consequential and high stakes decisions that we make are not like that. Maybe you make them once, or at most you're going to make them a handful of times. Even if you make them multiple times, you're not the same person. You can't go back to the person you were. You only get one first job, as I said earlier. And so if you get a do-over, you're at a different life stage. Time doesn't ever start over. And that means that every time you make these big choices, you're making them with very limited experience and knowledge. You don't know how you'll feel about your decision because you've never made that decision before. And more importantly, you don't know exactly where it's taking you, what opportunities it's closing off or opening. And I'm applying to college here, but think of things like buying a house, finding a life partner, launching a career. Most people only do these things once. We don't get a practice run. But then I was thinking, well, okay, that's true, but there are some things in life where you sort of get practice on, right? And one of them might be finding a life partner. You go on dates, right? But then I realized even when we do get a practice run of sorts as in dating, we'll never accumulate enough data to make credible inferences about what we want or how to get it. So there's, dating is a very high dimensional problem. There's so many factors that go into whether or not you hit it off with someone, right? There's, your goals and preferences and desires, and their goals and preferences and desires, and then everything going on in the market that determines whether you can connect with this person at all, right? And let's say that you do connect with someone and you make a plan to go on a date, and then there's all these circumstantial factors that can be going on leading up to it. Like maybe it's pouring rain, or you get caught up in traffic, or maybe on the way to the restaurant you run into your ex, and that leaves you, with the heebie-jeebies, or maybe your boss yelled at you at work, or your mother called you and screamed at you for not calling her back. There's a lot of circumstantial factors that are going to affect whether or not you feel like you hit it off with someone. Let's say there's like hundreds of these factors. You would need an enormous amount of data, personal data, to try to parse all of this out, right? So let's just pause on that for a second. Does anyone have any idea? I have this wonderful survey. It's a very weird survey that was actually run by scientists, but it was funded by the Match dating app. But it's a survey of all singles in America, not just people on dating apps, and a nationally representative survey. And it has all kinds of funny questions on it that sociologists would never ask. But one of the great questions, which actually has been very meaningful to me, is they ask so for people who are actively looking for partners, and of course, lots of single people don't want a partner. Or often they'll say things like, if the right person comes along, which means they're not actually looking, or they're passively looking. I want people who are actively looking, like they're going to bars or on dating apps. And then the question is, how many first dates did you go on in the past year? Okay. And then the follow-up question, which we're not going to talk about, is how many second dates did you go on in the past year? And that's a fun question too, but that's not a question for today. So does anyone want to, not you, because you've seen this talk before, but does anyone else want to hazard a guess? How many first dates do people go on the past year? Or actively looking? 20. Very good. 5. Anyone else? 50. I love that. Thank you for that optimism.
Yeah, the professor.
Fair enough. Yep. So it turns out, and for this crowd, I think it's worth saying, the median and the mean are almost identical. The expected number of first dates that people go on and who are actively looking in a year is 3. Okay, 3. That's nothing. That's nothing. It's like a little tiny bit of noise in a sea of, it's a little bit of data in a sea of noise. You'll never parse out what's going on here, right? And it doesn't accumulate. Like the dates I went on in my early 20s don't really help me when I'm a different person, right? I have different goals. And so it's very hard to accumulate knowledge as an individual. And so in my work with Mark, I have all kinds of evidence of how people try to strategize. This is partly about what you want, but it's also about how do you get it. So I have all kinds of evidence of how people strategize to attract desirable mates. So if you're messaging someone more desirable than you, what people do is they write much longer messages than they do for people who are equally or less desirable than they are. And interestingly, women write more positive messages. This says, I gotta say, I wish I dressed half as well as you. And they'll be more complimentary. They'll just be more enthusiastic. They'll use more positive words. And interestingly, when men pursue women who are more desirable than they are, they write less positive messages. They don't write negative messages, but they don't include all the compliments. So they're playing it cool, right? And so if you look at strategies like this, these aren't random. They're clearly attempts to shift the odds because they vary systematically with the desirability of the partner. But it turns out, the wonderful thing about working with online dating data is you can not only see the strategies, you can be like, does this even work? And it turns out that none of these strategies work. Nothing. People writing double the length messages are getting nothing back from it. But with so little data, how are you going to figure out what works and what doesn't? There's just so many factors, you can never disentangle it. So, this is not just a problem about dating. Like, think about going to college or navigating a curriculum or choosing a major. This is also obviously a contingent process. The courses we take early in college determine what options are available for us later on. But we don't actually see this. Sorry, this is I know for network scientists, I'm embarrassed by this diagram, but like, we don't see these paths, right? We don't know where our choices are leading us and what opportunities they're opening up or foreclosing. What we actually see are things like course catalogs and major requirements, and occasionally like arrows or diagrams of prerequisites, right? But that's like a giant stack of paper that you can't take that and parse out what this system would look like, right? And similarly, the same thing goes for career paths in the labor market. You'll see, job requirements for a particular job, but you're not actually going to see all the different ways in which people become like, a CEO of a dating app or a Hollywood animal trainer. We don't see all the steps that people took to get there. And we certainly don't see all of the strangers we don't know who kind of were in our shoes before, right? Those people are inaccessible to us. And so what do? With no personal experience or knowledge, we ask people around us. So we ask our parents what to do. We talk to our friends. We have advisors of various kinds. And the problem is none of them, as I mentioned earlier, have a whole picture either. Like, parents had their first job 20, 30 years ago. They don't know what the job market is like now. Peers are equally confused. And advisors are incredibly well-meaning, but what they have is that stack of partners. What they don't have is a perspective and they don't, certainly as you move out to the job market, they don't know where these choices are leading people. And they don't see the paths and where they go. So I become really consumed with this problem. And it resonates with a book that I don't know how many of you have read, but it's an amazing book. Everyone reads it in intro sociology. It's called The Sociological Imagination. And so as I was thinking about this problem, this is a book I kept coming back to. It's by C. Wright Mills. And he argues that he's basically a story about how he says people live completely unaware of the connections between their private lives and broader social structures and forces. And he emphasizes that if you could see these structures, the freedom and agency that can come from either acknowledging that this is not actually a choice for you to make. You think it's a choice, but there's no option, there's no good options. Or you can see the structures and kind of strategize around them and how important it is. And actually, it's a very messianic book. It's like the mission of sociologists is to kind of cultivate this kind of sociological awareness. And I really can't recommend it enough. It's like a very sophomoric book in the best possible way. In that it's really like it's a call to action. In fact, like, there's lines in it that say like, let every man be his own methodologist, let every man be his own theorist. And like, I know this is a little, like I said, sophomore, but I was like, yes, let every man, like, what if you showed people these structures? They could understand their context better, and maybe they could develop a methodology or a theory of the world that right now they don't see. And of course, I don't need to tell people in this room that with the rise of algorithms, these things become even more obscure and hard to understand what's happening around us. In that sense, I feel like maybe this need is greater than it's ever been. So this sequence of thinking led me to what I call like my tech bro moment. And I was like, I call it like C. Wright Mills, the author of that, it's like meet Silicon Valley. It's like, what if data and science can help solve this problem? And so, what if we show people these structures in a way that's actionable? So the structure of college curriculums, the paths to the labor market, the strategies that will pay off for them in dating, and strategies that don't. Like, we have enough data that we could do this in a very personalized medicine sort of way, like a Fitbit for your dating life. Like, and so it's not just about what works, but what works for you particularly. And these maps are not going to be perfect. In fact, we can talk at length about what would be wrong, what would be limited about this. But what was so compelling to me is they'd still be so much better than what we do now, right? We're getting terrible advice. And this would kind of be a way of crowdsourcing advice in a systematic way. So that kind of brings me to my research question, which is, well, there's many research questions in this project, but it's like, would people even act differently if they saw these maps? How much of a weight of evidence would you need to show people? Like, an anecdote is one person saying, well, this is what happened to me, but like 10,000 people just like you, would that be enough to move the needle on changing someone's behavior? And how might that be different for different types of people? But of course, like, how would these differences change people's lives, but also society's functioning as a whole? So I've been exploring these ideas in two different sort of demonstration projects, both at the University of Michigan. The first one develops maps of the structure of academic curriculums. And now we have linked those transcripts to like LinkedIn type resume data. So you can look at the structure of how people move, paths through the curriculum, but also paths through the labor market to show. And then the idea is to develop the technology behind these maps, which I could talk about if people are interested. But also what I want to highlight here is then you show them to people and you try to develop a science around like actionable information. And in fact, I want to just pause for a moment and say, like, I'm very interested for folks here. You all do networks. That's a big, like what you know also about like how to make that information actionable for individuals. And then the other project is a little research-based nonprofit dating app. And that one is in some ways more powerful because I can design the social structure, right? And provide explicit feedback to people about what's happening within the market. So I could talk about both of these projects for the entire talk, and I don't have time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very briefly say a couple of things about this one, and then I'm going to mostly talk about the dating app. So the curricular structures. So this is a joint project with a number of my collaborators. I'm showing you right here one example of these curricular structures that I worked on with Mark Newman and our postdoc Danisha. This is based on a hidden Markov model. And the key thing that I want to show you here is that they rely on sort of tens of thousands of transcripts from former students who have passed through the university. And one thing that's really amazing about using curricular structure to kind of work out this problem is that, in the job market and labor market, things are always changing, right? Like job requirements are changing, the demand for jobs are changing. The great thing about college and structure here is that even if people change requirements, the students are grandfathered in. So they spend their entire career under a stable structure. And so what I want to show you is sort of these on-ramps and off-ramps. This was generated just from the transcript data, but like after the fact, Mark and I label the different transitions so you can get a sense of how people are moving through the curriculum. And you see on-ramps and off-ramps. Sadly, most off-ramps are from the sciences to the non-sciences, but you can see over time these off-ramps disappear, right? And so the next step of the project is to refine these maps. This is sort of one of our first passes. And then to sort of develop a science around like saying to students, you are here, and understand what events precipitate different choices, but also help them understand the implications of the choices that they're making. And so importantly for our university, this is not supposed to be like the AI career counselor that takes away. And in fact, what I've come to appreciate is how much bedside manner might be needed for this kind of thing. There's a really a science around delivering this information. And so as part of this project, what we're doing is we are showing it to the students, but we're also showing it to career counselors and advisors and also the faculty in the departments and the administration to try to figure out like, what is the science of making this knowledge actionable and useful? So I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about that, but we don't have time today. And then, as I said, we're adding in the resumes so that you can really trace this out into the broader job market. Now, I just want to say parenthetically, what's the problem with this? Well, you go 40 years out and that's a totally different job market. You don't want to pretend. So another piece of this project, which is not done yet, but is part of in the works, is that I have a fantastic colleague whose career is devoted to anticipating changes in the labor market. So you don't want to go too far out, but to the extent that you go further out, you want to be able to anticipate what is happening down there that might be different from what you observed in the past.
Do you also include what the labor market looked like? Some information about what the economy was like at the time? Because obviously, like what job I take depends on what job is available.
Yeah, so like I said, I don't know, we haven't worked out the details of exactly how to do it, but you want to be able to adjust these maps to reflect, for example, if there was a lot of demand for, data scientists or whatever, web designers at a particular time, you want to kind of adjust those transition curves to kind of reflect the fact that those demands have changed. I think for now, like that's a big project to do that in a way that's reliable. For now, we're kind of doing the easier thing, which is like, 5 years out, something like that, where you don't see a lot of change. I think it'd be beautiful to do a whole lifetime, but it's just, I feel like it's very irresponsible to give people that information, have them think they know what's happening. So I feel like that's much more down the road.
Yeah, it was just like, okay, it was like 2008, there was the Great Recession, right? And so
right.
that's why they took those jobs.
Right, exactly.
So I feel like there's some of that needs to be added into context.
Totally.
I love it. I love it.
No, I agree. I agree. exactly. And I feel like right now, to be honest with you, I don't know exactly how to do that. Correct. I think it could be done, but I think for now, what we'll do is we'll say like first job, second job, just to kind of build out from the college stuff, but not go too far out, you know.
And I've got just a two-finger on top of this.
Yeah, please.
Because there is some economic literature looking at generational effects of what was the economy like? How does that affect your, your lifetime? Like,
yes,
the economy stinks this year, and then 2 years later, there's someone like you comes along, and there are opportunities that is totally different. You may be permanently affected by the fact that you graduated into the Great Recession.
yeah.
So there is some econ literature. So the product advantage is quite different, but it is looking at the path dependency depending on the first step. So
that's great.
Economic environment. So that's just, if you're not, that might have useful leads.
Yeah, I mean,
despite the fact it's economics.
I'm okay with economics, and I appreciate you. We just found out we can get the career trajectory stuff, and so I haven't really thought through that as much as I have the curricular stuff, but that's very useful information. And one thing that's clear is you need kind of a meta model on top of this model about what's happening, as Tina said, contextually. Yeah.
One quick observation: what you showed wasn't clear what the aggregation time was, right? So you could just do this in a time window that moves. The structure may emerge in the sense that the links.
Yeah.
So if you could do a data-driven approach where you just see the links and then try to see, in fact, the economy was not the way they did, or maybe something else, right?
Right.
Because if not, then you bring a paradigm that will limit what you see.
Yeah.
If you let the data alone and tell you,
yep,
you may see other things.
No, I love that, and you're right. Like I think even before you want to be like, I'm going to fix this problem, just showing how these structures are changing over time is completely. And
because you make this curricular or hypothesis first, and you just want to see that reflected data, whereas easy data is showing you a shift.
yes,
As you do your cohort following,
yep,
it all depends on when you started.
yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I want to give you my dating stuff because I would love your feedback on that too. Okay, so Rebel. Ooh, this is not what I wanted. This was supposed to come later. Pretend this isn't here, and there's a picture of an assistant professor in psychology. Rebel is a dating app I created with my colleague Amy Gordon, an assistant professor at UM in psychology. It's both a dating app and a research study. All the users of it opt into the research study when they join. It's only currently, we made a decision to make this a college student dating app for a variety of reasons that I think I'm only now realizing how brilliant that idea was because it solved a lot of problems. But it's only for registered students at the university. You have to be an active student. You log in with your student ID. And there's separate markets for grad students and undergrads, which has been a point of contention, but whatever, I just want you to know that. IRB approved, it went through legal counsel, and we've been discussing whether to open up to other campuses, but right now it's just at U of M. So
Just for that.
Oh my God, this is like a 3-year project to get it launched. So we beta tested it for a long time, and then it just launched last month. And so we have 750 users, which we're excited about. And it right now it works kind of like a regular, like a swipe right style dating app, although we're not wedded to that module. It's just to sort of get it off the ground. But what's unique about it is it has a bunch of experimental features. Okay. And the first one I'm going to talk about is not experimental. It's kind of a little bit dull, but it's very important for the work that we're doing. So first we do experience sampling and periodically ask people why they did the things that they did or how they feel about something that's happening. Okay. So for one of them is like, if you swipe right on them, like maybe once every 25 swipe rights will be like, what were you into? And people give their responses and they say all kinds of things. My personal favorite is actually this one. To be honest, I just really like golf. But what's nice about it is, as a social scientist, is kind of humbling. When we don't ask people, we're like, oh yes, it's race and it's income, and then you're like, people are doing all kinds of things. And similarly, you can ask if you swipe left, like what turned you off, and people say all kinds of things about what turned them off. My two personal favorites, again, is my humbling ones are same name as my brother and same name as my dad. good to know, And so there's a lot of information that comes from these. We have them like when you're texting with someone, they'll be like, how excited are you about this person? Could you see yourself having a relationship with this person? So that's a lot of data gathering that we can do within the app that's somewhat unique. But the things that I'm more excited to tell you about are more experimental features. And so the first one I'm going to call multiple search spaces. Okay, so and the way to think about this is that there is something in this. Obviously, there's a big project here about telling people the rules. And of course, there's a bunch of stuff about algorithms and market design that I'm not going to talk about today, but it clearly is a critical piece of this project. But one of the things, I've been studying decision processes for 20 years. And one of the things I've come to realize is how malleable people's preferences are. Okay. And more importantly, that we don't come into a situation with fixed preferences. We discover our preferences through the process of search. So, for example, there's a wonderful study of how people look for apartments in New York by a marketing professor. And one of the things that she found, she followed people as they were looking at apartments. And what she found was that, you sort of think you know what you want. You have some list of things, but then you walk into an apartment, you see a fireplace, and you're like, I love fireplaces. Like, I want a fireplace. And suddenly this has got the top of your list. Okay. And of course, this is a learning process. The things you see at the beginning are more influential than the things you see at the end, which unfortunately means that marketing people can basically not manipulate your preferences by changing the order in which they show you apartments. But leaving that aside, the key thing here is that there's preference discovery. And one of the problems with how people search for partners is that, and actually how people choose majors and all of these things, is that search is costly. And we only explore a very small subset of the total search space, and it tends to be very homogeneous. Like, we're seeing the same thing over and over again. So part of this project is like, what can we do to design for discovery, like make it easier for people to explore the search space and figure out what they want. So these search spaces are there to get that. And so the first one is actually like the one that's happening right now. So I've always found it really interesting that online dating apps, in theory, you could write to anyone on the app, but in practice, what people do is write to the exact same people they would meet in the real world. And part of that is people, but part of it is also the design of the apps, because you search based on geography and you search based on demographics. And guess what? People put in people like them, and they see people like them. And so part of the idea is, but what if you could take the same people but project them in a different way? So the same people are there, but now they're represented in a different space. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this part of the project. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those spaces. The first one is called Story Space. And if I have time, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Market Space. So Story Space is about life stories, like projecting people, letting people explore partners based on their life stories. And the way that we're doing this is as part of Revel's Profile Builder, we have a series of open-ended questions. And they come from actually a very famous psychology study about what questions or conversation topics lead to greater intimacy or closeness. And you probably heard of this through the gazillion articles about 36 questions to fall in love. And almost all of those articles were very hokey, but the irony is they were based on a very highly regarded set of studies about the questions. And so we got the questions from the study and we put a bunch of them into our app. And one of them is, what's your life story in 100 words or less? So you can imagine embedding these responses into a landscape where people who tell similar life stories are close together. And that opens up all kinds of cool questions. Like for example, like how different are people in life story space than they are in demographic space? Like, do people with different life stories have the same same life stories have the same demographics? And I would, based on what I know about demographics, what I've seen here, I would say the answer is no. The second question is, how do people search through life story space? Like demographically, we know each people tend to be very assortative, right? But are you like, if you hate your mother and that's your life story, do you want to marry someone who also hates them? Maybe you want someone who loves their mother. So there's a whole set of questions about how people navigate these space that I think is really interesting. And then the third question is, the matches that you find in life story space, do you have more connection with them? So we have all kinds of metrics within the measures in the dating app of how people are responding. You can just look at the texting dynamics to see that, or you can ask people how they're feeling and like, do they find more chemistry and connection there? So this is a really ugly rendition, but you can imagine like people are just allowed to move within the space and see what they find. So how am I doing for time?
You have about like 15 minutes.
Ooh, okay.
Or 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to take 1 minute to tell you about the market space, just because I think you guys might find it interesting. So, giving people the bird's eye view. So the market space is basically gives you a choice. So you come into market space And it says like, we can show you partners based on different criteria. And imagine you see a slider. And on one end of the slider is basically like, show me the types of people that I'm most interested in, based on my past behavior, based on some prediction about people like me. And on the other end of the slider is, show me the people who are most interested in me. And there's an open question about who are those people on one end, who are the people on the other. But the key thing is you give people, you're like, this is the market, this is who you have, you get to choose. Like, how do you want to weight these two things? Do you only want to see the people who like you? Do you only want to see the people you like? Or do you want to find some balance? And so there's all kinds of questions about how people make choices when they get that perspective. But then of course, like, can they, are they more successful about finding matches if they can kind of strike a balance? So this is the search space part of it. And I want to, my last thing I want to talk about here is our second feature, which I kind of call boosting social signals. So we talked before about people wandering in the sea of noise. What can we do to kind of boost the feedback they get from their environment? So we're doing this through a feature of the app we call Revel Insights. And so it's a piece of the app, it's a tab. And what we basically do is use this as a way to push information to users about the market and their position within it. So there's two types of insights. One are global, and the other one is personalized. And so right now we've been working on the global ones. I know, I'm so sorry. This is like very small font. The only thing you need to see is like, this is the app. There's a little interface for the insights, and each of the insights is sort of like, this one's called, it's 8 a.m. Are you swiping? And it's just showing you the frequency of use by time. And the idea is right now they're quite vanilla, but they are all descriptive norms. How are other people who you don't see actually using the app? So another one is about snap decisions. How long do you spend on a profile, and based on the decision you make? If you like them, you'll spend more time than if you don't like them, but giving people a sense of what other people are doing. And then the third one is along the same lines, basically like, what kind of emojis are people using in their messages, trying to understand like, this is what's happening in the market. But the ones that I think are going to be more, have more bite to them, these have bite, but we have to show everyone the same insight, because I get it and David didn't get it, but I show David my phone and he already has it, right? But the personalized insights are for you, like nobody else will have that. So we can do more experimental stuff about, like, some people get personal insights and some people don't. And so, as I said before, like we have a lot of surveys, and one of the surveys we ask people is, there's a big survey when they join about their preferences. Okay, so you can imagine like the personalized insights, and this is not how they'll be delivered. This is my little way of telling them to you, but you can imagine them being like, you say you like tall blondes, but you're actually most excited by short. Or that opening line never works for people like you. So you can give people strategic information. No, in this case, strategic, but this one is actually like the Fitbit for your dating life. Like I've accumulated up your data, and this is what you're doing. So there's a lot of stuff you can do in this space of fun. But I want to end by talking about why I'm not sure this is a great idea. Social engineering is not like actual engineering, and there's a lot of people now starting to work in an area called emergent engineering, like basically how do you engineer dynamic systems. And so I just want to end by talking about some of the problems with this that are causing me concern, for which I don't yet have solutions, but perhaps you have thoughts about it. So the first one is sort of obvious, like, if you tell everybody the rules immediately become obsolete, right? This is my little the best pickup line is nice shoes, and like nice shoes, it doesn't work anymore. So the effectiveness of rules depend on how many people are using them. Now they actually also depend on who is using them, but that's actually a more solvable problem than the first one. So you want to give people the rules, well, now the rules are different. And then the second thing is a little different, but it's also something that worries me, which is like more about the college app in some ways. Like, the phrase that kept coming to me is like, if I had known how hard it would be, I never would have tried. So, sometimes it's good not to know how unlikely something is, because you're more likely to do it. So it can deter people from making risky but rewarding moves, and also like sort of homogenize the choices that people make. And this is an even bigger problem if people's goals aren't fixed, which I already told you they're not. So that's a problem as well. And then the last problem is more of a social problem, which is that, societies have evolved with people on the ground floor, not with the bird's eye, right? And so society works because people make mistakes, they take wrong turns. There's a lot of error built into the system, right? And so, so like think about ant foraging. There's a lot of ants that go off to completely unproductive places, but occasionally they find food sources there. So like individual mistakes are kind of what makes society work. And so giving people this map is going to change that dynamic in ways that probably will not be good for social motion. Okay, these are my problems. Yet I'm doing it anyway, at least for a cohort of students. And I want to tell you, I want to end with this like kind of on the horizon, because there's a piece of this project that is like, I want to build up an alliance, and maybe you guys are interested in this too. So one thing that really bothers me is that increasingly our matrix life choices are being made online. I don't have to tell you that. This is just a graph of the years couple met by the way they met. And the main thing I want to show you is this red line of like the fraction of people who met through online dating. And what this says is that in people who met in 2019, 40% of them met online. And now in 2025, it's over half. Okay, so this is the most dominant way that people are meeting. These are social worlds that have huge implications for our offline lives, right? And these are social worlds designed by for-profit companies, each of which has its own little gimmick about how to search and how to find people. But you know, they're optimizing for profit, not human flourishing. It's very conservative. You don't want to do something unprofitable, so you're not going to make sort of radical decisions. And of course, they're not grounded in science. There's no empirical evidence that algorithms work. And the types of A/B testing that happens within these companies is not at the level of what I'm talking about. So we should own this space, is what I'm thinking. And one of the reasons why I built Revel was I wanted to be like, we can do it. And like, I have to say that Revel, it took 3 years to build and we've only just launched, but like the Hinge people are, you know, came a calling. There are things that are already more innovative about what we're doing than that way I've ever done. And I actually think that this may not be as obvious to you guys, but for social scientists, like we need to stop just critiquing the world and writing papers, but be builders in this space. So part of my vision for this is to create a consortium of nonprofit apps. And Revel was really the tool to kind of do dating and then maybe friends. But I'm working with a colleague at Wisconsin to develop a housing search app. He's at Madison, which is a nice closed market for developing that. And then trying to figure out how we could do a very simple job search app. For example, in Hollywood, there's industries that are like within that industry, there's one place to look. And you could sort of develop and work out some of the problems there. And so if you're interested in this idea or being part of it or know a way to fund it, it turns out that it's much easier to commercialize my dating app than to create a nonprofit consortium. Let me know. So I'm going to stop there and I welcome your questions.
Any questions? I guess I'll start us off. I feel the same kind of anxiety and problems that you were talking about, in particular, the last one about the backfiring, because it seems like we're exploiting a lot more than we're exploring, right? Like when you go to the library, you would normally find, you know, the book that was next to the book that you really wanted.
Yep.
It was the actual thing. And now this kind of exploitation is like at every level of society across any kind of span, and that is not good for us. I feel like I'm not a sociologist, but you know I act as if I am. So can you speak a little bit about that? Like, do we have examples of where societies just exploit and then they die, or something? I don't know.
That's a great question.
Falling on the doom and gloom and the rain.
Wait 10 more minutes for this one.
Yeah. So no, it's a great point, and I totally agree with you. And in fact, it's going to, like, the diversity of choices is going to like rapidly diminish, right? And so I share your concern, and I don't have a solution except that I think, remember I showed the search spaces? Like, I don't think you can build maps without reducing the cost of search and kind of forcing people to still search. Because I feel like if you can, right now people search very narrowly. But if you search more broadly, you're more likely to potentially make a larger range of decisions. And so I don't think you can create these maps without pushing people to enhance their exploration. But I don't know exactly how that all will work together productively, or if there's like a systematic way of balancing those things. I mean, for example, I'm sure at Northeastern too, like the current political situation being what it is, like universities are very much needing to like justify their existence to the world. And so, you know, one of the reasons I get all this access is because I'm working with my provost office to kind of do these tools. But I told them that I don't want to do the maps unless they're willing to build a search and exploration tool, because like this parenthetically, like 4,000 classes in my college and people take 20 of them. Like class taking is a terrible way to explore the landscape. But what I don't feel like I have yet is a more systematic statement about how those two things can work together.
And I think because humans typically are lazy, right? So I'm just gonna exploit. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, one can have a personality that says, no, I wanna explore and whatever, but
Right.
most people tend to be lazy. And so they're just gonna say, okay, the algorithm quote unquote knows, and this seems reasonable. And even, for example, within recommendation systems, we've been working with Brennan and Eric and Moritz and my student David Liu.
Yeah.
We know that with recommendation systems, if they recommend some stuff that is beyond what you're comfortable with, in fact, you will engage more with it. But they don't do that.
Right.
Companies do not do that. They don't want to take that risk because they want the immediate reward.
Right.
The long term.
Right.
So anyway.
But I wonder.
Questions. I'm sorry.
Do you want to? Well, I was just going to say very quickly. I think this is another reason why this is not a tool that should be just handed off to people. Like it should be done through advisors or counselors or people who have some kind of training in how to use it. Because I feel like left to one's own device. But I wonder to what extent having someone who is structuring people's experiences could avoid some of that or encourage them. Because another way of looking at this is you can take more risk and explore more if you know there's a path, like, oh, okay, I can do this crazy thing because I know I can still end up in a business. You know what I mean? And so in some ways it opens up more risk taking if you use it that way.
So someone bring an analogy from the LLM or the large language models.
Yes, please.
But so there's this understanding that when you have a population using LLMs and they start producing content that LLMs will eventually use as a training set, then you start converging to kind of like a dull space because everything looks like the LLM. It's like a nice shoes analogy in your cartoon. So my question here, so in computer science, there's a clear way to measure something that's an outcome that's not desirable, right? Like you want diversity, creativity, and so on. In the space of in sociology, specifically for the domain that you're studying, is there a way to measure desirability as a community skill, right? So say you're improving health because better matches in dating leads to a better life of some sort, or is it like productivity? Our societies are so much more productive, or is it like, oh, there's peace, or no, there's So what are what's the cost function? That's a very controlled way to put it, but in a way you're perturbing the system rather than intervention, and it's yielding an outcome. And so that outcome, how do you measure it now? Not from the user perspective, which is, I think, the bottom of approach that we follow, right? Like maybe, couples are lasting longer or something. People have outcomes in that aspect of their lives. But how is that intervention affecting the larger framework or the larger, I don't know, what's valued in sociology, right? Like, is it like a more egalitarian society, or is it a more segregated, some more stable? That you spoke about it, things and caste systems that may be very stable. They have to be there for thousands of years. Is that a good thing? Anyway, so my question is, what is your framework? What would be a way to monitor? Oh, this is actually great.
Right. No, that makes sense. Let me take that one piece at a time. And I think for the dating app, the fact that I'm doing it with this collaborator and her area is building successful, strong, loving relationships. And so part of what's going to happen is she actually has another app where when people get into couples, you can enroll them in that and follow, like she wants kind of the cradle to the grave of relationships. And so I think one thing could be about relationship satisfaction in existing relationships, or the length and duration of relationships combined with the amount of satisfaction could be. And for example, eventually, if we have a matching algorithm, that's the what we want to test it on, right? If we do some kind of A/B testing of different algorithms, you would like to see the ones that lead to more satisfaction and more duration potential. I don't know, so satisfaction for sure. And so that's one way of thinking about the metric. And the other thing, which is a little bit more narrow, but I think is an issue, I said, I'm not going to talk about algorithm things today, but one of the issues that we're kind of struggling with is, like all dating apps, there's a power law distribution of attention. And there are people on our app who are getting a ton of matches. And then there's 40% of men are getting none, and so it's like, I think that we care about more equalizing the amount of attention and matches we get. And so kind of thinking about ways to provide more satisfaction to different types of people who are using the app, not have this winner take all structure would be another metric. It's maybe more internal to the app than like external, but I think it's also something that we're thinking about. For the college one, originally this project was there because I think 40% of people graduate from colleges, even at, universities like the University of Michigan. There's a lot of dropouts. And there's a lot of people who get very lost. Like they don't get on the train to a particular outcome and they just get stuck and then they exit. And so originally the idea behind doing this was in some ways to sort of democratize information and strategy, especially for first generation students. And so one metric would be like those students have higher graduation rates, or those students, if their goal is to have a stable job after graduation, are better able to achieve that. I think once that's kind of was actually the motivation for that project. And then I was like, oh my God, nobody's getting good advice, but I think as you expand, it becomes a little more ambiguous, but particularly for those students, I think there's kind of a clear way of assessing whether or not it's doing something. So those are some examples. I would welcome other ideas though, because like I said, I think,
You have more questions.
Oh yeah, please.
Sam?
I'll pass.
Oh, pass. Okay.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So these, I might be a little bit too hung up on the board game analogy. So I
Okay.
apologize if this is hard. But I was curious about like one of the other things about like relative to board games is that it's not totally clear what it means.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you think about the relationship between what it means to win in this context and the rules? The two, and maybe that's something like preferences is one sense of what it means to win, or maybe there's another way of thinking about that. But I was thinking about this too in the college path as well. And what you were just saying, doing some long stable job, life after college that lasts them.
Right. Yeah.
That's kind of like fun. And
Okay.
then part two is thinking a little bit more about what rules are and the difference between rules as a empirical regularity, rules as an optimal strategy, and then like rules as a for action in which people are acting. So it seems like within that context, your first major problem at the end might itself be that like third measure rule. Like there are kind of limits or boundaries to action, and it's just a different sort of problem to developing rules.
Yeah, those are great questions. Do I have time to answer? Should I? Okay, so regarding the first one, you said preferences. I actually think the more germane thing is goals, like sort of higher order than preferences. But like, what am I trying to achieve here? Do I want a long-term partner? Do I want to have a hookup? Do I want to whatever? People come on to these apps with many different goals. And ditto, like you said, I think you said very nicely about the college thing. Like some people want the highest income job. Some people want to have a job where they have a lot of work-life balance. There's many goals that people have when they come into these systems. And so they're all on the same game board, kind of playing a different game. And I think one thing that gives me hope, first of all, I don't think I fully worked out how to think about this. Like the game life analogy is still one I'm kind of working out how much one can get from that. But I think that piece of it, the heterogeneity of goals, gives me optimism about the problems I talked about at the end, because it means there will be diversity of behavior. If everyone had the same goal, this would be a disaster. But if there's a lot of different goals, then there'll still be a lot of heterogeneity in the choices people make. And so I think it's right that that's a very different way that life is from games, but in some ways it may be helpful for avoiding some of these negative consequences. And then I think what you said before about different ways of thinking about rules, like rules as strategies versus rules as containers for action. I think that that's a really good point, and it's one that is like very much something I'm trying to think about right now. And so I appreciate you raising it, because I think social structure, when we think about like showing people, I'm using the word rules very loosely, like rules can be tactics. right? Or rules can be like, this is like the rule of one thing leads to another, right? Like this is the kind of structure you're moving through, and that's the C. Wright Mills view. And I think I've been focusing more both on kind of both, but not being clear where I'm focusing on them. In the dating app, there is definitely stuff about tactics, but in the college one, it's trying to show people the structures. Of course, if you see the structures, that suggests particular tactics. And so I guess if you have thoughts about this, I'd love to hear them. I haven't quite figured out how to think about these different nuances, to be honest with you.
Great, Brandon.
Thank you guys. So for and kind of building off the rules question, this has a container for the technology container for choices. I'm wondering if there's a certain size of your actual market where you can even start to demonstrate these rules. So like there's 750 people in a dating market. Is 750 a market at that point, or is a lot of the ways that imagine like a 19-year-old using an app is going, he is like swiping, and then you depleted the market. So is there a certain point at which it clicks into you start to be able to see people's preferences? I want people who have had similar life trajectories as mine, or I want people who I desire versus who desire me. All these affordances that are being built in, is the size big enough for that?
So we slow people down. You only get 5 matches a day. So it takes people a while to exhaust the set of matches that they have. And so how big is the market big enough to be sustainable? I think it is a market in the sense that there's supply and demand and people match. But I think what you're kind of getting at is also the learning and the exploration and understanding different ways in which you can navigate this market. I mean, our hope is that it will continue to grow like it's growing right now. But I actually think because of the way we have 5 matches a day, it is big enough to answer these questions. As long as people don't narrow their preferences too much. One of the concerns I had is that people would search for like one thing and there'd only be 5 matches on that thing. But one thing that was interesting to see is that most people don't have additional screener criteria. And I think part of it is because they're all college students. They're all undergrads at UM. They already have this big thing in common. And so people are more open to matches in a way that they might not be for a market of the same size in a conventional dating app. That's a great question.
One quick question, Eric.
I'll try to be quick. So the rules, you could tell people, oh, nice shoes is a good strategy. And that becomes performative in a way, because then people decide that that's like a good strategy. But I was thinking that sometimes like the rule set can be so obscure and complicated that we might actually desire a sort of like PCA-ness of all the signals that people sort of use to evaluate the choices. So is there any sense in which that sort of performativity could be a good thing? Like a sort of, like I was thinking of it as a bad thing originally, that we're sort of like just all compressing onto this level of person. Do we ever like want the sort of dating process to just be less complicated? You know?
I mean, I think a lot of people want it to be less complicated. But I think what you're saying is like there's so many strategies you could use, and you're saying like limiting to fewer known strategies, would that be beneficial in terms of, I mean, I guess it depends on what they're signaling to you, right? I mean, I think you didn't bring this up, but a big problem with this project, which I think is solvable, but is not trivial, is that, you know, the payoffs to strategies that we see, like, I mean, for example, the people who end up, you know, dropping out of chemistry and ending up in English, their outcomes would not be the same as the people who don't drop out, right? There's a lot of unobserved heterogeneity, and so once you start telling people these paths lead to these outcomes, it's not just that the you know, the probabilities change because of the number of people, but it's also the types of people. And so like there's a very, like right now I'm trying to be very conservative in what I say these maps are. Like this is what happens to people, not this is what will happen to you. But I think that part of the problem is that the payoffs will still be very heterogeneous. And I don't know if that will lead to more confusion or less. Yeah.
I hate to do this, and I know you have a question online, but I have to cut it off. Kate, I will ask her your question and I will send you an email with a reply. My apologies, because her schedule is tight. For those of you who are going to be here today, if you want to speak with Elizabeth, she will have an open session at 435 on the 10th floor, especially the students and postdocs